Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to read my father's eulogy once again. I did this CD and dedicated it to him called Circles years ago. And I dedicated the entire interior of the booklet to the life of my father and tangentially our family. I'm quite proud of how it all came together. My father observed Pearl Harbor being bombed, so I thought it fitting to have this beautiful picture in the document. I took this picture of dolphins beneath the water on a boat trip with my mother in Waikiki Bay. I drew this picture surrounded by the puzzle portrait of Walter Egan, who was always enigmatic and just a strange fragmented puzzle of a genius. And then the artwork with the coins I thought was quite nice. The little UFOs became relevant later on in my life. And one of my father's favorite songs was The Last Farewell by Roger Whittaker, so I covered that. And it was a really exploratory album, experimenting with new forms, trying to be a little bit more sophisticated and moving beyond the simple rockabilly and rock and roll. Oh, there's a sweet little dog walking by. Hello. And there was just a whole intense confluence of events over the past few weeks. I had my albums stored at my aunt's house in her attic for years and years as I tried to flee the trafficking deep state cabal that tried to enslave me, make me some sort of odious sex slave. Stood against them. I've been almost murdered numerous times. My family, instead of coming out and advocated for me, joined the sides of darkness, and which was so heartbreaking for me because it's like I love them. We were dysfunctional. I was angry at them, but I would never have wished them what they wished upon me. But in the end, my father, willed me the fair share of his inheritance, and he left something very important in the wording that I would be able to reallocate my wealth in alliance with my values. He could have locked in that my money go to my sister's family, but he gave me that freedom, and I hope maybe in the end that he refound his love for me that we lost through most of my adulthood in those last years that I moved back and lived with him and kind of took care of him and cleaned up his condominium. So anyway, I just completed my will around the same time that the CD showed up again. And so it's been pretty emotional. I've been hit pretty hard by the vicious meanies with the chemical weapons beneath the floorboards and through drones through this whole process of completing my will. But it is done. It is done, it is done, it is done, and can't be revoked. So without further ado, I'm going to read to you my eulogy that I wrote here that I wished I could have given. I wished I could have given at his funeral. Alan Stanley Lloyd, at age 11, sat with his father on the patio watching the black puffs of smoke rise as the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That experience in 1941 and the ensuing war years shaped my father's ideology profoundly, making him conservative and hawkish on military issues in ways I just couldn't follow, perhaps because I had a comparatively peaceful and sheltered childhood. I do remember in my own early years in Kihei on Maui, seeing flashes of light in the night sky as bombs were dropped on the small desert island of Kaho'olawe, used for target practice by the military. I remember hearing the explosions, but my parents were so cheerful and casual about it, the sound of freedom, that it was never associated with feelings of danger or fear in my mind. Alongside that memory is one of humpback whales leaping entirely out of the sea in great plumes of white spray, sharing the same horizon. My grandparents arrived on steamships in Hawaii in the 1920s and took part in one of the last pioneering experiences you could have in the USA. The islands, not to become the 50th state until 1960, were still sparsely inhabited, undeveloped. My father came into this world in 1930 on the island of Oahu. The war changed things a lot, drawing international focus to Hawaii's strategic military center in the Pacific that it was. Americans wanted to visit this paradise we had almost lost to Japan. The place began to boom economically. Elvis and Doris Day and Sandra Dee all came out to star in movies. A nostalgia lingers in the islands to this day for that simpler time during the 40s and 50s when you knew where everyone stood on things, and the sound of big band, swing, and Don Ho and traditional Hawaiian slack key guitar sounds vied for airspace on the radio. After the war, Alan was sent to the mainland to complete his education in Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, receiving a mechanical engineering degree like his father. Upon his return to Hawaii, he was hired by the Westinghouse Corporation and married an island girl, Barbara Harper, my mother. During this time at Westinghouse, my father began making forays to the outer islands, where he established bonds with the pineapple and sugarcane plantation Luna's bosses, and quickly earned the reputation as a fix-it guru with a lot of integrity. He would always make sure that a problem with their machinery was resolved with the greatest fuel efficiency and least expense to the company. They loved him for that. Dad, it seems, was blessed with both an early understanding of what his true calling was and a successful career that allowed him to make the most of his prodigious skills and brilliant mind. A few years later, my sister Lori and I came along, and one of his biggest clients, Maui Electric, offered him a job on the Friendly Isle. That was a joyous time for Dad and us kids, but unfortunately depressing and isolating for Mom, who had already spent too many years growing up on scantily populated outer islands. There's a simplicity and clarity to the way my father's mind works that enables him to take on life with great focus and happiness. That paradoxically often left his more emotionally complicated wife and daughters flummoxed. We all tagged along and benefited from his love affair with the loveliest fleet of islands that lie anchored in any ocean, quoting Mark Twain. Along the way, he'd learned to fly small four-seater Cessnas, and he'd take us on heady inter-island hops, giving us children the steering wheel for minutes at a time during turbulence-free stretches over the Pacific. We returned to Oahu to my mother's relief and spent the rest of my growing up years on the northeastern shore of Oahu, windward side, in the beach community of Kailua. The islands settled into a tourism-based economy, and to my mind, the pioneering days were over. The music of the Beach Boys, the Eagles, Jimmy Buffett, the Steve Miller Band, Heart, Led Zeppelin, and the Rolling Stones filtered over from the West Coast and mingled with the Hawaiian music, which was beginning its own renaissance, mixing with soul and Motown, and served up to my generation by ultra-gifted, multi-ethnic pop groups like Cecilia and Capono, the Beamer Brothers, and Kalapana. Lori's and my teenage years brought on a confusing time for the Lloyds. My sister and I both benefited in a lot of ways from my father's uniqueness, but I think we suffered from it as well. He is singular. He's also one of the brightest minds I've ever known. Somehow this resulted in feelings of frustration and anger in me, and a distance formed between us for long years as I sought to understand the world in my own way. And so while my father's star continued to rise in the islands, at age 18 I'd pretty much flown the nest. Alan Lloyd made major contributions in the area of energy efficiency in the islands. And made groundbreaking innovations in a device known as the heat pump water heater. His contribution in that area helped win for his company the prestigious Edison Award, a rare prize for a smallish utility company existing in a far-flung outpost in the Pacific. Younger generations of engineers speak to him and of him with reverence and continue to call upon his savant-like abilities to assist them in resolving thorny technical problems. Retiring hasn't slowed him up a bit, freeing him to pursue his other passions. He is a historian and an avid photographer and public speaker. In the final years of my mother's life, my parents traveled to many places around the world. In his final days, my father was a valued speaker for numerous clubs and historical societies, and a regular guest lecturer on ocean liners like Serenade of the Seas, making trans-Pacific voyages. His speaking topics covered the Battle of Midway, the history and volcanology of the Hawaiian Islands, and other places he had come to love in his travels, such as Norway and New Zealand. He gave slideshows as he told his stories. At the time I wrote this, he was 76 years old and was an example of how to age gracefully. The album came about in part as an effort to help me in my journey back to my father. As I mentioned earlier, I included 2 cover songs with my original co-writes. One is a favorite of his, The Last Farewell, that reminds him of my mother. The other one, suggested to me by Walter Egan, is Circle in the Sand. This song conjures a vivid childhood memory of bright moonlit nights on the beach in front of our home in Kihei. Dad would take a stick and draw big circular labyrinths in the sand with 2 entryways, and then challenged my sister and me to race to the center. Such is life. He passed away peacefully on the eve of Thanksgiving. And as I mentioned in a previous post, after dedicating his body to science, his ashes were scattered off the beach of Lanikai. So thank you for joining me on this last farewell to my father. Namaste.